Hey guys, it's Isaac here. Welcome back to the channel. One of the questions that I get asked pretty often is, how do I actually do my budgeting and scheduling for an upcoming project? And I get asked this pretty often, so I felt it'll be helpful to make a video and show you guys my detailed spreadsheet and what I consider. All of the preparation and budgets and scheduling for an upcoming home build happens well before I even break ground on it. Ultimately, it's important to do this on the front end so I know what my estimated build cost is, and I have a high degree of accuracy of knowing where my numbers should fall within to do the build and complete it. And before we dive into the video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you can see our other videos about the different steps of the new construction home build process. So here I have the budget up for this island project that we're currently working on. So from a high level, when I look at my spreadsheet, I can see those buckets of work on the left, and then I can see those categories across the top. So here I can see these are a list of all of my expense. We can call them expense types here. I then have my material, I have my labor, and then I have the total category, which is basically the sum of the labor and material for that expense type. And then my actual. And what I say my actual, that is basically what I actually paid for it versus what my budget says I should have spent for labor and materials, or the total of those two. So if we look here, I estimated that my site survey and site plan would be $2,500, but in reality it only came out to be $1,700, $1,750. So that's what the difference is between my total, basically my estimated total, and then what I actually paid for it. And of course, we want our actual cost to be lower than what our estimated total is. We don't want it to be higher. And the way I choose to do my budget is I outline what my buckets of work are. So what I mean by that is, initially here I have my soft cost, my site prep work, all of my structural stuff, and basically getting into the dry-in stage. I then have my trades, interior finishes, and exterior work. For example, under my soft cost, I have the lot acquisition. I pay $8,700 for this. I then go through my blueprints, my soil testing. Everything from septic design, insurance, permits. And again, these are all of my soft costs, like things to help me get to the actual construction side. Everybody does their budgets a little bit differently on how they break things out. I've seen some people do it as far as cost per square foot. But I personally like to work in the actual cost that I was quoted rather than a cost per square foot. It just makes it easier for me personally. So my lot clearing, I'm estimating to be $18,000. I'm waiting on the invoice for this lot. I'm estimating that it'd be 18, and realistically it'll probably come around 15,000. So when I get my actual cost or my invoice from them, I'll put that here under what is called actual. Here I'll also have a category for notes or description, and I know which company I'm having do that work. So this company is called Clearfield. Now you'll see sections like this highlighted in yellow, or cost highlighted in yellow. And the reason I highlight these in yellow is because I'm not exactly sure what that final cost will be. So I'm estimating $18,000 because this company doesn't give you a total price. They do everything about based off of how much time and how much material it'll cost you. And so I'm estimating it'll be 18,000 just based off the breakdown from their quote. But I highlighted yellow because I'm not exactly sure what that cost will be compared to my septic system. So my septic system is the only thing that they actually give a hard number for and say, hey, in this case, it is $25,500 to do so. So in our site prep category, we have, of course, the lot clearing, the footing, the foundation, the backfill, and then we have our septic and drain field, which will come later in the project. But I have all of those things categorized under my site prep. So if we look at the structural category, I have my framing, my roof trusses, my windows, exterior doors. And then if we go down to siding, you can see the same thing. I'm estimating what my siding material would be. And then I have a fixed cost from my subcontractor named Jose to install all of my siding on this home. So the next bucket of work is my trades, which is my plumbing, electrical, and HVAC. So of course here I have, it's highlighted green because these are the fixed quotes from my vendors. And then here, the only material associated with that are the fixtures that I'm required to buy. And if you see here, I have a note also beside their name, 60/40, because I pay out 60% at roughing, which is the initial phase before drywall, and then we pay 40% at trim out. Next, I go to my interior finishes. So I have my insulation, drywall. Will also does my drywall. And as you see here, he quoted me $2,780. So then we go down to my countertops. And then the rest of the items are pretty straightforward. I have my tile, my appliances, any home accessories such as the towel bars or the shelves in our closets. All of those kind of fall into there. And Jose installs those things for me for $1,000. And then at the very end, I have all of my exterior work. These last two sections at the bottom of the page, remaining labor and remaining materials, as I'm going through the project and I know what my total pricing is for those labor items and those materials, I can then subtract what I've already paid from my expense sheet, which is also in here and I'll go over. But I can subtract those payments that I've already made against what we agreed upon initially, and I'll know how much I have left to pay out. And this is really important when it comes to managing your cash while doing a new construction build. So I'm gonna skip over my project schedule tab for now and we'll come back to it. But if I look at my expenses tab, here I have an expense tracker and it outlines all of my expenses. So what I do is every time I make a payment for material to one of my subcontractors or the county or anything, I then keep a receipt of it and I import it in at the end of the week or the end of the day when I'm doing my total calculations for what I've paid out for that week. This cell is also important because it shows what my remaining items that I need to pay for. And the reason that I have this is so I can manage what my actual project total would be. So because some of my expenses that I estimated in the beginning have came out a little bit cheaper than what I thought, my estimated project total when I first started was 230,000. But because of some of the items coming in cheaper, I'm roughly at 221,000. So of course, during your project, some things are going to come up and it's going to make your total increase versus some things are going to come in a little bit lower and your materials may be a little bit cheaper than you initially estimated. So your project budget will slightly decrease. So it's important for me to have this so I can kind of follow where I'm at any given time during my build. So you may be wondering how I got specific costs for my labor on this build project. And simply put, I reached out to different subcontractors and got quotes. Now, I personally like to work with the same subcontractors because we've developed a great working relationship. But when I first got into home building or even construction in general, I had to reach out to different subcontractors and get quotes for the scopes of work that I wanted done. If we want to look at one trade as an example, we can look at our frame. And so when I look at my frame and I see that it is $6,580 that Oscar quoted me to do all of the framing for this structure. I also included in his scope installing the windows, the exterior doors as well, and then the crane to set the roof trusses. So the reason I was able to get a quote from him is because I sent him the plans. I told him based off my budget what items I wanted him to do, and then he came back and gave me a final price or quote to get it done. And while that example was only for the framing, that can apply to all of the trades and all of the scopes of work that you have in your budget. So for example, if you know that a subcontractor is able to do drywall, trim, flooring, paint, or home accessories, you can give them a set of plans and describe what items specifically you want them to do, and they should be able to give you a quote for those very specific items. Now, to get my material quotes or my material estimates rather, I do what we call takeoffs. And takeoffs basically gives you the material count that you'll need to do your home build. Now, there is a degree of inaccuracy to that. It's not 100%, but you can get close probably 85, 90+%. Depending on how well you do your takeoffs. And honestly speaking, there are several services nowadays who would do the takeoffs for you. So if we look here at mine, I have all of my framing material outlined, then my windows, doors, roofing, and etc. But if we see here, I know that I'm gonna need about 350 pieces of 2x4 by 93 inch studs. I know I'm gonna need 150 2x4 by 16. Now, if we're also going through here, these are all of my framing lumber. I even have things such as how many tubes of subfloor adhesive, how many wood screws I'm gonna need for our girder, and then even house tape, flashing, and then the sheathing clips as well. So I try to be as detailed as possible. That way, if I'm ordering it or I have one of my admins order the material, they already know exactly what we need in the quantity. So it makes it significantly easier for me, them, or anybody else to follow this and order that exact material. The important thing to understand here is the more detailed you are in the beginning, in the planning stages of your project, the more efficiently your project is going to run. So if we look at this spreadsheet again, if I have all of these things that I need outlined, it's going to make it significantly easier when it's time to order those materials, because I then don't have to waste time and figure out exactly how many bundles of roof shingles we're going to need or how many rows of underlayment. It also is important because if I under order, if I don't order enough of the material, it's going to delay my guys when they're working. And then we're going to have to do store runs, or we're going to have to schedule last minute deliveries, which is not efficient for a home build. As we continue through the material list, I have my trade rough-ins, which are the things that I'm required to provide based off the scope of work. I even have my siding material on here. So I know for this build, I'm using D5 siding, and I need 200 pieces to get this whole house done. I even outline how many boxes I'm gonna need, how many rolls of trim coil. Again, I want to be as detailed as possible, because if I put that time in now, it's going to save me time on the back end while we're actually working on site. So the next thing that I also focus on is consolidating my budget to what I call a bid sheet. And this is what I send to my lender when I'm getting my construction loan, so they can easily follow what my actual build cost is going to be. So on my bid sheet that I send to my lender, I still have it broken out into different buckets of work, such as site prep, structural, trades, etc. However, as you see, it is significantly more consolidated. Here, I also go through in different stages and highlight where we are in the project and what draw amount I'm requesting. I've also highlighted these items in red. And the reason I do that is because this is part of what my build cost will be, but based off what me and my lender have agreed to, these 3 items are not factored into the loan. So I'm required to pay for these 3 items, and my lender will cover the rest of them. So their total loan commitment is $187,500, which is about 80%, roughly 79–80% of what the total project cost is going to be. And again, this page is not supposed to provide the very nitty-gritty details about what goes into these numbers. It is supposed to give my lender an easy to read format and follow where we are in the project and what we are supposed to be paid out in draws based off those different stages of the project. So here's an example of a scope approval checklist that I came up with. This was one I developed for my electrical scope on a renovation. So here we have relocate fridge, relocate the range, add the dishwasher, and various electrical scope items. And so what I do at the beginning stages of a renovation project such as this, I will print this out and we'll go through, and he initials all of these items saying he agrees to do them, he understands them. Now, while this may seem as though like it's a additional step that may not be necessary, I found it very helpful because it basically level sets both of us and says, hey, these are the items that you have agreed to do based off the quote you've given, and these are the things that I have to pay out for. Now, if something comes up that is not listed on this scope of work, I have to pay them in a change order to do those additional items. So it basically protects both of us. Now, while this example was just for a renovation project, you can easily develop this same type of checklist for a new construction project. Now, more often than not, subcontractors and contractors in general work off a set of plans that has all of that specific information, but it doesn't hurt to actually have a checklist like this. It's just an additional step, and it can probably make that process a lot easier. So now we've arrived at the project scheduling page. We start with our project start date. This is not when we actually start breaking ground on the project. This is when we actually submit our building permit. For me, I started on October 15th. I submitted my building permit, and I'm estimating that the duration is 15 days. So if we also look and compare this page to our other pages, they're formatted in the same way. Site prep, structural, trade work, etc. down to finishes and exterior. So when I'm doing the formatting for this page, the things I want to pay attention to are our start dates and our durations, because that will determine when one task ends and the next task is ready to begin. So here I have my lot clearing as starting 6 days after our building permit. And the reason I have it as 6 days after is because that is what Clearfield requires before they start work. They need at least 6 days notification so they can schedule it, get it in their system, and then they can go ahead and send their crews out there. So I have their duration as 7 days to complete the lot clearing and site prep. They usually finish before then, but I want to account for the worst case scenario and make sure that it's at least captured in here. And if it's sooner than then, I can always adjust my budget to be shorter than. More than anything, this schedule gives me a reference or a baseline point to go based off of. If I know about how long it should take one of the tasks to complete or one of the scopes of work to complete, it gives me a gut check and says, hey, are we on schedule? Are we on target? We can build in room for additional things that may come up, or if inspections are backed up and take longer than we anticipate. But it gives us a reference point of where we need to start and where we should be at any given time. A good example of why this scheduling is important is because if I know about when we're going to start different scopes of work, I also know when we need to have material on site to do it. So for example, if we're going to have Jose do our trim carpentry, and based off our timeline, he's going to start on the 26th, I need to have all of our materials staged and ready before the 26th. So even if it's on the evening of the 25th, we can make sure it's there. That way it doesn't delay Jose from starting his scope of work. And using this schedule, I can go through every trade, every scope of work, and I should know when we're supposed to be at what stage of the project. But ultimately, it's a good reference of when people should be starting, so you can notify people well in advance versus telling them the day of, hey, I need you to start tomorrow. I personally like to give my subcontractors a 2-week notice, and then I remind them a week before to make sure we're good and we're on schedule. That's primarily why I use this schedule, to keep them updated, and I should know where we are during a specific build process. And remember, everybody does their budgets for home builds or construction projects in general a little bit differently. Some people do it based off of cost per square feet because they want to know what their cost per square feet is for different trades, versus I personally like to do it by a fixed price. However you're able to do it, as long as you're able to track what you need to and manage your budget efficiently, you should be fine. So now that you know how to make your budget, do your scheduling, do your material takeoffs, and manage your expenses, stay tuned to figure out how we find subcontractors and what the remaining steps are in the new home construction build process. See you guys soon.